Montana Territory, July 1878. The day Adelaide Whittaker ran barefoot from her uncle's ranch was the hottest of the summer, sun hanging like molten brass over the plains, her lungs burning as hard as her legs. She did not stop for the briars or the blisters, not even when her dress tore at the hem. She only ran, because she knew if she looked back, she might lose her nerve. And she could not afford to lose anything else. She had waited until the ranch hands rode out. Her uncle, Silas Whittaker, had taken the wagon into town with 2 men and half a bottle of whiskey, cursing about feed prices. He would not be back until dusk. That gave her a narrow window. She had hidden food in a flour sack, dried apples, 2 biscuits, and the last of the smoked meat from the smokehouse. She had no shoes, no map, but she had her chance. By mid-afternoon, she stumbled onto the old cattle trail that cut through the eastern edge of the property. Her legs ached. Her throat was dry. But then came the low thunder of hooves. A single rider pushed over the ridge, dust trailing behind him. He slowed when he saw her, pulling the reins on a tall bay with a white blaze down its nose. The man was young, maybe 30, with a strong, lean build and a sun-darkened face. His eyes were sharp and steady, the color of river stones. He reined in beside her, boots settling in his stirrups. "You look like you are running from something," he said, voice quiet, calm. Adelaide stood her ground, fists clenched around her sack. "I am. You need help?" She hesitated. Her heart thudded against her ribs. "I need to get far away from here. My uncle, he's a cruel man. I cannot go back. I will not." The cowboy studied her face, then looked toward the trail behind her. "You got a name?" "Adelaide Whittaker." He nodded once. "Foster Remington. That horse trail runs east another 15 miles. Then it meets the stage road heading toward Helena. I'm riding that way. You can ride with me." Her eyes filled with tears before she could stop them. "Why would you help me?" Foster dismounted, unfastened his canteen, and handed it to her. "Because no one should have to run barefoot under the sun with that look in their eyes." She drank greedily, wiping her mouth with her sleeve. He opened his saddlebags and pulled out a folded blanket, cut it into strips with his knife, and began wrapping her feet. "You do not have to do this," she whispered. He gave a short shake of his head. "I am not leaving you out here alone." They rode double, her arms tight around his waist, her face pressed to his back as the horse carried them east. She had not held on to anyone in years. Not since her mother died, and Silas took over the ranch like a conquering army. She had been 13 then. Now she was 19, and she had learned to live small, to keep her head down, to survive. But as the sun slipped low and the mountains turned blue in the distance, Adelaide felt something she had not felt in a long time: safe. They camped near a creek that night. Foster built a small fire and gave her the last of his jerky. She sat quiet, legs tucked beneath her, watching him tend the flames. "You said he was cruel," he said, breaking the silence. "What did he do?" She looked up, the firelight catching in her eyes. "He worked me like a ranch hand since I was a girl. Never let me leave the property. Locked me in the barn once for 2 days when I talked back. He's mean. He drinks. And lately, he's gotten worse. I think he was planning to marry me off to one of his friends." Foster's jaw tightened. He stared into the fire for a long time. Then he said, "He will not touch you again. I promise." She blinked back tears. "Why are you being kind to me?" He turned toward her, his expression softening. "Because someone should have been, a long time ago." She looked at him, then really looked. His eyes were tired but kind. His hands were rough from work, not violence. And when he met her gaze, he did not look away. "Thank you," she said. They slept on opposite sides of the fire. Foster gave her his bedroll and used his saddle for a pillow. She watched him in the flickering light, wondering what kind of man just rode into someone's life and offered to stand between them and everything they feared. By morning, they were moving again. Foster had a plan. He knew a family near Helena who owed him a favor. He said they would take her in, give her a place to rest, decide her next steps. But she did not want to leave him. She did not say that out loud. 2 days later, they reached the homestead of the Breyer family. It was a small spread, but clean and orderly, with a whitewashed house and 3 children running barefoot through the dust. Mrs. Breyer came to the porch, wiping her hands on her apron, and hugged Foster like a brother. "Who is this?" she asked, smiling at Adelaide. "A friend," he said. "She needs a place to stay a while." Mrs. Breyer nodded. "She is welcome here." Adelaide watched him as he stepped back toward his horse, tightening the saddle. Her stomach dropped. "You are leaving," she said. He looked at her, eyes unreadable. "Only if you want me to." "I do not," she said, voice trembling. "I want you to stay." He took a slow breath, then nodded. "Then I will." That night, they sat on the porch after supper while the sun fell behind the hills. He handed her a mug of coffee and leaned against the railing. "I meant what I said," he told her. "I will stand between you and anything that tries to hurt you. You never have to go back to that ranch." Adelaide looked at him, her heart pounding. "You already have." He reached for her hand. She let him take it. And for the first time in her life, she believed someone meant it. The creek behind the Breyer house ran clear and slow, and by late August, it had dipped to its narrowest, the stones along the bed warm underfoot. Adelaide stood knee-deep in the water one morning, lifting her skirts just enough to keep them dry. She was scrubbing a shirt of Foster's against a flat rock, her fingers raw but steady. "Don't reckon I've ever seen you take to chores like you were born to them," Foster said from the bank, one boot braced on a fallen log. He held a split rail under one arm, shirt sleeves rolled, nails tucked in his mouth. Adelaide didn't glance up. "It's different when it's for someone who's kind." He set the rail down and crossed through the shallows, boots sloshing. When he stopped beside her, she handed him the shirt, clean and dripping. "You don't have to do this," he said. "I know. That's why I want to." He took the shirt, studying the careful stitching at the collar where she'd mended a tear. "Didn't see you come out this morning. Thought you might still be sleeping. I woke early. Couldn't settle." He didn't press. Instead, he moved back toward the bank and wrung out the shirt with practiced hands. She watched the muscles shift beneath his forearms as he worked. It wasn't the first time she noticed, but it was the first time she let herself look without guilt. By midday, they'd finished fencing a corner of the Breyers' pasture. Foster leaned on the post driver, sweat darkening the back of his shirt. Adelaide brought him a tin cup of cool water from the kitchen, the rim dented from long use. "You ever think about stopping somewhere?" she asked quietly, handing it over. He drank, then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Sometimes. But I never had much reason to." "You do now?" His eyes found hers, steady and unreadable in the way of men who've had to keep too much locked down. But he didn't look away. "I reckon I do." That evening, a wind picked up from the northwest, stirring the dust and bending the tall grass. The sky turned the color of iron just before supper. Mrs. Breyer stood on the porch, towel in hand. "We'll have lightning before dark," she said. "Best get the animals in early." Foster and Adelaide moved together without needing words. She gathered the chickens into the coop, while he led the mule into the lean-to. The first crack of thunder rolled as they latched the last gate. Inside, the youngest Breyer boy clung to Adelaide's skirts when the lightning flashed again. "Don't worry, Charlie," she said, crouching beside him. "Storms pass." He pressed his face to her shoulder, nodding. Later, after the children had been tucked into their sleeping loft, and the wind had settled into a steady hum against the windows, Foster sat beside her near the hearth. The fire had burned low, casting a soft glow on the braided rug and the wooden floor worn smooth by years of boot steps. "I've been meaning to ask," he said, voice low. "You ever think about where you'd want to go?" She turned toward him, her hands folded in her lap. "I used to dream about Boston." That was where my mother was born. She told me about the ships and the snow and the cobbled streets. But now. He waited. Now I think I'd rather stay somewhere quiet. Somewhere with trees and a roof that doesn't leak. Somewhere I don't have to look over my shoulder. You'd have that here. She inhaled, slow and deep. It's not mine to take. It could be. Silence settled between them, but it wasn't the kind that hurt. It was the kind that waited for something to grow. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. There's a place about half a day's ride east. Old trapper's cabin. Needs work, but the well's still good. I've been thinking about it. She met his eyes. You're asking if I'd come with you? No, he said, voice quiet but certain. I'm saying I won't go unless you do. Her throat tightened. She stood, walked to the window where the storm had begun to pass, the moon breaking through in pale slices between the clouds. When she turned back, her answer was in her face before it reached her mouth. Then we'll go. He stood and joined her at the window. Outside, the trees glistened with rain. Everything smelled of earth and new beginnings. He reached for her hand. She didn't hesitate. They left the Briars homestead just after the first frost, when the yarrow browned and the aspens dropped their last gold leaves. Foster loaded the mule cart with what little they had: a rolled mattress, a dented cook pot, a sack of flour, and 2 wool blankets Adelaide had stitched from scraps Mrs. Briar gave her. He tied down the load with quiet care, checking each knot twice. Adelaide watched from the porch, her hair wrapped in a scarf against the wind, her hands tucked into the sleeves of her coat. Foster looked up. You ready? She stepped down without answering, walked straight to the cart, and climbed in beside the bundles. Her silence was full, not empty. He understood. The cabin sat at the edge of a pine rise, where the land began to lift toward the high ridges. The trees there grew close, and the wind moved through them like breath. The place had once belonged to a trapper named Arlen Cates, who died the winter before last. Foster had helped bury him, and the land had sat quiet since. When they arrived, the roof had held. That was the first mercy. The windows were unbroken, though the door sagged. Adelaide ran her hand along the rough-hewn lintel before stepping inside. The air was dry with dust but not sour, and the hearth still held the ghost of old fires. She set her satchel down and looked around. It's better than I pictured. Foster dropped the last bundle beside the hearth. It's ours now. That first night, they slept with their backs to the stone wall, wrapped in both blankets, their shoulders brushing. Foster stayed awake long after she slept. The wind howled once around the corners, but the walls held. He watched her face in the firelight, the lines of it softer now, the strain gone from her brow. In the weeks that followed, they moved like 2 people who'd known each other far longer than they had. Foster split wood each morning while Adelaide cleared the root cellar. She found 2 jars of preserved turnips still sealed and a string of dried apples too brittle to eat. She planted them in the soil behind the shed, just to see what might come up in spring. One afternoon, she found Foster standing at the ridge behind the cabin, surveying the land. He'd cleared a stretch of brush and marked the edges with stones. "What are you building?" she asked, stepping up beside him. "Something with a roof that won't leak and a table big enough for 2, he said. "Figure we could use more room. If we mean to stay." "We do," she said without hesitation. He didn't look at her, just shifted the axe onto his shoulder and said, "Then I'll build it." That night, they ate boiled beans by candlelight. Adelaide had taken to folding her hands over her bowl before each meal, not in prayer, exactly, but in thanks. Foster noticed it, though he never said anything. Afterward, she traced the edge of the table with her finger. "I never asked where you came from." "Before." He leaned back, chair tipping slightly. "Kansas, originally. Father drove freight. Died when I was 15. I took up cattle work soon after. Never stayed anywhere long." "You never speak of family." "Not much to say," he said, then paused. "There was a sister. Younger. Annie. She died in a fire when I was 16. After that, I stopped looking backward. Adelaide set her hands in her lap. I used to think if I kept remembering my mother, it made her less gone. It does, he said, quiet and sure. She nodded once, then glanced toward the window, where snow had begun to fall in thin, slanting lines. By December, the first drifts had settled against the cabin walls. Foster carved hooks for their coats, and hung a kettle over the fire. Adelaide made soap from lye and tallow and wrapped it in scraps of cloth to keep the scent in. They moved easily around each other, passing tools, sharing space, trading warmth in small, wordless ways. One evening, after hours spent mending a broken sled runner, Foster set the finished piece aside and watched her as she sorted lentils on the table. "You ever think about what comes next?" he asked. She looked up, her hands still. "You mean after winter?" "I mean 5, 10 years from now. What you want to make of it?" She considered that a moment. "I want a garden. A porch with a railing. I want to wake up every morning and not feel afraid." He nodded slowly. "You'd make a fine mother." She didn't flinch, but her voice dropped. "I used to imagine having children. Before. Then I stopped." He moved closer, resting one hand on the edge of the table. "If you ever want it again, if we ever want it, I'd stand beside you in that, too." She turned toward him, eyes steady. "You already do?" The candle burned low. Foster reached out and brushed a loose strand of hair from her cheek. She closed her eyes at the touch, then leaned into it. He didn't kiss her. Not yet. But she knew he would, when the moment asked for it. Outside, the snow thickened, softening the world. Inside, the quiet between them deepened, not from absence but fullness. It was the kind of quiet that grows roots. The cabin walls creaked as January settled in with a dry, unrelenting cold. Frost collected along the window edges like lace pressed in glass. Each morning, Foster lit the fire before dawn, moving barefoot across the floorboards so the floor didn't groan beneath him and wake her too soon. He'd split a stack of juniper the day before, and the scent of it drifted through the room as the kindling caught. Adelaide stirred when the light climbed past the sill and caught the wool edge of the blanket. She sat up slowly, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. "You always get up before me," she said, voice rough. "I like the quiet before the world starts moving," he replied, poking the coals. She stood, wrapped herself in her shawl, and walked to the hearth. "You could wake me." "I could. But I like watching you sleep more." She looked at him then, and something flickered in her expression. "You ever want to leave this place? Go further west?" "Not unless you're going with me," he said without hesitation. They ate oatmeal with dried currants and the last of the honey from a jar Mrs. Briar had slipped into their bundle months ago. Outside, the snow had drifted over the stone fence Foster built, and the trees stood bare and still. After breakfast, Adelaide took the ledger book from the shelf above the hearth and opened it on the table. Its pages were already half filled with neat lines of handwriting and tidy sketches in the margins, planting notes, lists of seeds she hoped to trade for, a record of the eggs from the 2 hens they'd gotten in exchange for mending a neighbor's wagon axle. Foster set a tin of nails beside her and brushed sawdust from his trousers. "You always write with such care," he said. "I was taught letters before everything fell apart," she answered. "My mother made me copy scripture and poetry when I was little. She said words mattered, how you shaped them, how you remembered them." He pulled out a chair beside her. "Did you ever write anything of your own?" She hesitated, then flipped to the back of the book and turned it toward him. On the last page, in delicate script, was a verse 4 lines set apart from the rest. He read it twice. "Did you write this for her?" "I wrote it for me," she said. "So I wouldn't forget I still had something inside me worth keeping." He didn't answer right away, just reached across the table and rested his hand lightly on hers. "You do." They spent the rest of the morning mending gaps in the chinking where the wind had begun to whistle through. Adelaide passed him the bucket of clay and straw while he worked the mixture into the cracks with a flat stick. "You think we'll make it through the rest of winter without trouble?" she asked. I think we're better off than most, he said. I've seen worse winters. You learn to listen to the land. It tells you what's coming, if you know how to hear it. She leaned against the wall, arms crossed. What do you hear now? He looked out at the line of pines stretching east. The thaw's still weeks off. But the birds'll come back before the ground softens. That's how you know spring's close. In the afternoon, a rider came up the ridge, a boy, not yet 20, shoulders hunched against the wind. His coat was frayed at the cuffs, and his horse moved slow with exhaustion. Foster stepped out to meet him, rifle slung over his back. The boy pulled up short. You Foster Remington? That I am. The boy handed him a folded paper. Man down in Three Forks said you might be here. Said you know what to do? Foster unfolded the note, read it, then folded it again and slipped it into his coat. Adelaide stood in the doorway, watching. What is it? She asked once the boy had ridden off. Trouble with a cattle run east of here. A friend's son's gone missing. They're asking for help. Will you go? He looked at her for a long moment. Not unless you say I can. She didn't answer right away. Then she stepped down and placed her hand on his chest. You've done more for me than anyone ever has, she said. But I won't keep you from something that matters to you. I'll ride out at first light, he said softly. Be back by week's end. I'll keep the fire warm, she answered. That night they laid close, her head on his shoulder, her hand resting just above his heart. Either of them said much. The silence didn't ask for it. Before sleep took her, she whispered, Come back whole. He kissed her temple. Always. Foster returned on the 5th morning, his coat stiff with dust and his eyes red from lack of sleep. The sun hadn't yet crested the ridge, but Adelaide had already stepped outside with her shawl bundled tight, something in her chest tightening when she saw his silhouette rise from the trees. He dismounted slow, favoring one leg. She closed the distance between them, boots crunching frost. You're hurt, she said, scanning him. Ankle turned when the horse spooked near a ravine. Nothing broken. He reached out, fingers brushing her sleeve. I'm all right. She didn't touch his face, didn't ask more. She only stood there, letting the relief settle in her bones. Inside, she warmed broth and set out clean bandages. He sat at the table, silent as she unwrapped the boot. The swelling was bad, but not dangerous. She worked with care, and he let her. You find the boy? Dead. Caught in a snow slip east of the pass. We buried him proper. His father was there. He looked at the fire. I think he'd been gone 2 nights before we reached him. Adelaide didn't speak. She tied off the last strip of cloth and covered his foot again. After he'd eaten and the fire had been fed, he leaned back in the chair, watching her as she rinsed the basin. You wrote while I was gone? She nodded. A few pages. Nothing worth reading. I'd still like to. She dried her hands slowly. I wrote about the ridge. About the way the trees lean west even when the wind's still. I don't know why that struck me. Maybe they're just used to bending. She looked at him then, and something passed between them that had no shape, only weight. They fell into a rhythm again. Foster stayed off the ankle, working with a draw knife from the bench while she handled the firewood and carried water. He showed her how to whittle pegs for furniture joints, how to test the grain in a board. She picked it up fast. One cold afternoon, she stepped into the shed and found a small chest half built, its sides planed smooth. What's this for? She asked. He didn't look up. Clothes. Books. Whatever you want in it. Figured every home needs a place for things that matter. She ran her hand along the edge. You think this is home now? I know it is. That night, while the wind whispered against the shutters, she reached across the blankets and took his hand beneath them, fingers curling with quiet certainty. He turned toward her, eyes catching the firelight. You ever think about marrying again? She asked, voice low. Never did the first time. Her brow rose. I've never been anyone's husband, Adelaide. She studied him. Would you want to be? He nodded once. But only if you'd have me. She sat up and reached for the small box they kept near the hearth. From it, she drew the copper ring her mother had worn, polished down to a dull sheen but whole. I found this in the bottom of my satchel last month, she said. I didn't know it was still there. He took it gently, turned it over in his hand. It's plain. So am I. He met her eyes. You're not. Not in any way. She held out her hand. Then let's make this real. He slid the ring on her finger, and when he kissed her, it wasn't rushed or hungry. It was the kind that settled deep and stayed. They spent the following months building. By spring, the new addition to the cabin stood firm, with a window that caught the dawn and a table large enough to seat others. Adelaide planted potatoes and onions in the back, and Foster built a cradle without saying a word about it. One morning she stood in the doorway with her hand low on her stomach, watching the sun rise across their field. When did you know? He asked from the bed. A few weeks ago. I wanted to be sure. He swung his legs over and pulled on his boots. And now you are? I am. He crossed the room, rested a hand on her back. You scared? A little. He kissed the top of her head. We'll raise them honest. Like this land quiet and strong. They didn't leave the homestead again. Neighbors came through now and then, trading preserves or seed or tools. They all knew the Remingtons by name, and spoke of their place as a mark of where the good road ended and the true country began. Years passed. Foster built Adelaide a writing desk, and she filled book after book with words she never shared. Their son grew tall and quiet, like his father, and their daughter carried Adelaide's sharp eyes and stubborn streak. They raised chickens, then goats, then one gray mule who lived 15 years and died in the field with the sun on her back. One evening, long after the children had gone down for the night, they sat on the porch with coffee in their hands and the scent of lilac drifting through the open window. Do you ever miss the road? She asked. He shook his head. Everything I ever wanted is right here. She leaned against his shoulder, and he rested his cheek against her hair. The stars came out slow, one by one, and the land held its breath the way it always did before the season turned. They stayed that way until the fire inside burned low, and the night grew soft around them, full of the peace they had made with the world and with each other.